Why healing fails without knowing your mother's truth, Carl Jung explains. There's a reason some people spend years in therapy and still feel like something essential is missing. They meditate, journal, eat well, chant affirmations, and try their best to forgive everyone including themselves, yet the pain persists like a ghost that won't leave. Carl Jung would say they're not failing to heal. They're simply healing in the wrong place. Because healing isn't just about releasing trauma. It's about uncovering truth. And one of the most uncomfortable, rarely spoken truths, one that Jung hinted at repeatedly, is this: your path to wholeness cannot be complete until you face your mother's truth. It's a chilling idea, not because it blames the mother, but because it reveals just how deeply intertwined you are with her psychic blueprint, not her personality, not just her actions, but her truth, the unresolved grief, shame, longing, resentment, or unlived life that she may never have spoken aloud, but passed into you like a whisper in your blood. Jung didn't see the mother merely as a parent. He saw her as the first and most powerful psychic imprint. She is, in essence, your first mirror. And if that mirror is distorted, if she denied herself, rejected her truth, or lived behind a mask, then part of you inevitably absorbs that distortion and calls it love.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more topics you love.
The problem is, we're trained to avoid this investigation. Society tells us to honor thy mother in a way that confuses obedience with reverence. Many spiritual seekers are afraid to look here because it feels like betrayal. But Jung knew something dangerous. If you don't uncover the emotional reality your mother carried, what she actually felt, not what she showed, you might mistake her unprocessed pain as your own identity. That's how deeply psychic inheritance works. You take her unlived life into your body. You dream her dreams. You carry her shame. And no amount of modern healing tools will touch it until you name it. Now ask yourself something piercing. What parts of your life feel like they don't belong to you? What emotional reactions feel inherited, not chosen? What are you trying to fix that might not even be yours? Carl Jung believed the unconscious is not just a personal shadow, it's ancestral. And at the core of that ancestral web lies the Great Mother archetype. Not the literal mother, but the primal force of mothering itself. Every human has a relationship to this archetype, and it is first modeled by the biological or emotional mother. If her love was conditional, you likely developed patterns of overachievement, people-pleasing, self-abandonment. If she was emotionally volatile, you may now equate love with anxiety. If she was silently suffering, you may have become the rescuer or the invisible child. But these aren't just roles, they are unconscious contracts. And Jung's work invites us to break them. To know your mother's truth is not to criticize her, it is to humanize her. It is to see the woman behind the role. What did she lose before she ever held you? Who did she long to be before the world told her who she had to be? What secrets did she bury to survive? And perhaps the most dangerous question of all, what did she sacrifice in order to raise you, and did she choose that sacrifice freely? Most of us don't want to know the answers. We fear that seeing our mothers fully will rupture the pedestal we built to survive childhood. But Jung would tell you that rupture is sacred, because only by breaking the illusion can you finally reclaim your own soul. Otherwise, you spend your life unconsciously editing yourself to keep the fantasy of the good mother alive long after you've outgrown it. Here's where it gets profound. Knowing your mother's truth doesn't mean confronting her. It means confronting what you carry of her inside yourself. The grief you inherited but never understood. The beliefs you adopted to stay safe. The emotional vocabulary she passed down silent, encoded, invisible, but potent. You don't need her confession. You need your awareness. Because when you shine light on what was unconscious, it no longer controls you. That's how healing actually begins. This is why so much healing work plateaus. People are trying to heal symptoms, depression, anxiety, loneliness without tracing the lineage of the wound. And Jung would say, go to the root. Not the story your ego tells, but the energetic blueprint beneath it. Because unless you understand the psychic inheritance between you and your mother, you might be living her pain while calling it your purpose. So the truth is haunting, but freeing. You cannot fully know yourself until you begin to know her. Not the mask she wore, not the mother she tried to be, but the woman she was when no one was watching. The unfinished poetry, the swallowed screams, the dreams she left behind and didn't talk about at dinner. This is not blame, it's liberation. Because once you see it clearly, you can decide what to carry forward and what to finally lay down. The unlived life of your mother is the burden you're secretly carrying. There's a peculiar weight that follows many of us through adulthood. A heaviness that has no clear origin, no sharp trauma to point to, but lingers like inherited gravity. You feel it in moments of unexplained guilt. In the pressure to achieve, to nurture, to please, in your impulse to overextend for others, or in your fear of becoming too much. You might call it anxiety, perfectionism, codependency. Carl Jung called it something else, the burden of the unlived life of the parent. And he warned, in no uncertain terms, that if we fail to bring this unconscious burden into the light, it becomes our invisible master. Most often, this burden flows from the mother. Not because the mother intended it, not because she was cruel, but because she was human-shaped by a world that did not allow her to fully live. A world that told her what kind of woman she had to be before she could decide for herself. And so she adapted. She played roles. She made sacrifices. She denied parts of her spirit to be good, strong, or respectable. But what happens to those denied parts? They don't vanish. They sink into the psychic soil and wait. And when a child is born, those buried fragments don't stay buried, they reach for life. Through you. Jung taught us that what remains unconscious in the parent will be lived out by the child. So if your mother never pursued her art, you may feel a pressure to be creative, but without joy. If she stayed in a loveless marriage, you may fear intimacy even as you long for it. If she was taught to silence her needs, you may find your voice catching in your throat when you try to say no. These patterns aren't just emotional, they're archetypal. Deep mythic energies pass through the mother's unlived life into the child's psyche, shaping identity in ways the conscious mind can't explain. Now, ask yourself, what part of your personality might not be yours at all? What if your drive to succeed isn't your own ambition, but her suppressed hunger? What if your chronic caretaking isn't pure compassion, but inherited guilt from her self-abandonment? And here's the kicker. Until you recognize this dynamic, you'll believe the pain you're carrying is your failure, when in truth, it's an unconscious loyalty to your mother's incomplete story. This is why Jung emphasized the need to individuate, to separate yourself from the psychic structures you were born into, especially those of the family. But you can't individuate from something you won't acknowledge. You can't break a pattern you're still romanticizing. That's the trap for many. We either idealize our mothers to protect them from blame, or we villainize them to avoid seeing our own participation. But Jung's path requires something braver. We have to see clearly, not to assign blame, but to locate the thread of inheritance. Because once you find that thread, you can choose whether to keep weaving with it or release it altogether. And this is where healing becomes spiritual, not just psychological. When you begin to sense that some of your deepest wounds are not your own, but belong to an ancestral chain of pain, you stop trying to fix yourself and start freeing yourself. You realize that the sadness that lives in your chest may be older than your name, that the shame you feel when resting or saying no might be your mother's guilt echoing through time. And your work is not to punish yourself for carrying it, it's to bless it, witness it, and put it down. But this isn't done in rebellion. The goal is not to reject your mother. It's to release her, to let her be who she is, not who you need her to be, or who she pretended to be. It's to allow her her own brokenness, her own longing, without trying to fix it by proxy. Because healing doesn't happen when you avenge your mother's suffering by duplicating it. It happens when you stop the cycle, when you choose a new way, when you say, "This ends with me." And perhaps the deepest act of love you can offer your mother, especially if she was never allowed to live freely, is to live freely yourself. Not as defiance, but as redemption. To express what she couldn't, to feel what she avoided, to become what she buried. That's not selfishness. That's evolution. That's the soul remembering what generations forgot. So if you feel a weight you can't name, look backward. Listen deeply. What part of your life are you living on behalf of your mother's unlived one? And more importantly, are you ready to give it back? Breaking the ancestral contract, how to stop living the wounds that aren't yours. There's a silent agreement that begins before you're old enough to speak. A contract signed not in words, but in emotion, loyalty, and survival. Carl Jung understood this deeply, that we don't just inherit genes, we inherit psychological agreements, unspoken deals made between generations. Most of us are unconsciously bound to our parents' unfinished business. We become the carriers of what they couldn't face, the containers for what they couldn't hold. And if that burden goes unrecognized, we end up mistaking inherited wounds for our own identity. The only way out is to break the contract. But to do that, you have to see it for what it is. What does it mean to live someone else's wound? It means you wake up every day weighed down by fears you've never investigated. You say yes when you want to say no, and you tell yourself it's kindness. You overgive, over-apologize, over-function, and call it being responsible. You sabotage love because part of you believes too much joy will make others resent you. None of these beliefs began with you. They are echoes, fragments of your mother's truth, your grandmother's silence, your lineage's survival tactics, passed down like sacred law. These are ancestral contracts, And they often begin with one question: what must I become in order to be loved? And that question shapes everything. If your mother needed peace to cope, maybe you became the quiet child. If she needed praise to validate her worth, maybe you became the overachiever. If she was emotionally fragile, maybe you learned to be strong, never showing your own pain. You adapt to her wound, and in doing so, you form a blueprint. But what happens when the blueprint no longer fits the life you're trying to build? Jung insisted that real transformation begins the moment we confront what is not ours. This means separating love from obligation. It means realizing that empathy without boundaries is not compassion, it's enmeshment. And perhaps the greatest act of courage is this: to love your mother, your ancestors, your lineage, and still say no to the roles they gave you. Not to reject them, but to refuse to carry what was never yours to begin with. But breaking the contract is painful, because the moment you begin to detach from inherited patterns, you'll feel guilty. That guilt is the glue that keeps the system intact. It whispers, "Who are you to be free?" when she was not. But Jung would say that's precisely the question that matters. Who are you truly outside the matrix of inherited pain? Can you love your mother and still choose your own path? Can you be grateful for her sacrifices without replicating her suffering? This is the initiation, to step beyond the emotional loyalty you were born into. It is not a rejection of family, it is the evolution of it. You're not dishonoring your mother by refusing to carry her pain. You're honoring her deeper wish, perhaps one she could never say aloud, that you might become more whole than she was allowed to be. And to do that, you must first see the wound clearly. You must name the contract, break the spell, and stand in the fire of your own truth. So how do you break the ancestral contract? First, you must witness it. Write it down. Speak it aloud. Not with blame, but with clarity. I see now that I was trying to fix my mother's loneliness by never being alone. I see that I made myself small so she wouldn't feel threatened. I see that I chased perfection because she never felt good enough. These recognitions aren't attacks, they're awakenings. Then you choose differently, in small, consistent ways. You rest when guilt says you shouldn't. You speak honestly when silence feels safer. You set a boundary where you used to self-sacrifice. And each time you do, you crack the contract open. You rewrite the terms. You show your nervous system and your ancestors that there's another way to exist, one that doesn't rely on pain for connection. And most importantly, you do it with love. Because this isn't about exile, it's about liberation. Jung believed the soul isn't interested in maintaining inherited stories. It's interested in individuation, becoming whole. And to do that, you must return what was never yours. You must bow to the wisdom of your lineage, even as you step away from its shadows. So the next time you feel that invisible weight, the need to please, the fear of being too much, the exhaustion that has no cause, pause. Ask yourself, whose story am I living right now? And then gently, bravely, begin to let it go. Liberating the feminine, reclaiming the lost voice of the inner mother. Beneath all the inherited patterns, all the ancestral contracts, all the unspoken agreements we unknowingly sign with our mothers, there lies something softer, older, and far more powerful. It is the voice of the inner mother. Not the woman who raised us, not the mythologized figure we protect or rebel against, but the archetypal feminine force within each of us, male or female, that knows how to nurture, protect, receive, and restore. Carl Jung believed that to truly heal, we must reconnect with this deeper feminine energy. Because without it, we are left stranded trying to survive life with strategies built on deprivation, guilt, and performance. And the terrifying irony: many of us have buried the inner mother so deeply in loyalty to our outer one that we no longer know what her voice sounds like. Beneath all the inherited patterns, all the ancestral contracts, all the unspoken agreements we unknowingly sign with our mothers, there lies something softer, older, and far more powerful. It is the voice of the inner mother. Not the woman who raised us, not the mythologized figure we protect or rebel against, but the archetypal feminine force within each of us, male or female, that knows how to nurture, protect, receive, and restore. Carl Jung believed that to truly heal, we must reconnect with this deeper feminine energy. Because without it, we are left stranded trying to survive life with strategies built on deprivation, guilt, and performance. And the terrifying irony: many of us have buried the inner mother so deeply in loyalty to our outer one that we no longer know what her voice sounds like. You can feel it when it's missing. You can feel it in the way you talk to yourself when you fail, in how quickly you dismiss your needs, in how often you confuse productivity with worth. When the inner mother is unconscious, we become rigid, self-punishing, emotionally starved. We try to earn rest. We view pleasure with suspicion. We reach for love that hurts, because that's the version we were taught to normalize. This isn't a personality flaw. This is the wound of a feminine force that was silenced before it ever got to speak. Jung saw the psyche not as a collection of thoughts, but as a living temple filled with archetypes. And the mother, in its highest form, is the foundation. When she is distorted, when her presence in our early life was absent, chaotic, or conditional, our entire relationship to care becomes transactional. We don't feel safe inside ourselves. We don't trust softness. And so we become imitators of love, not receivers of it. We chase external validation instead of internal holding. We build identities that look whole on the outside but are starving on the inside. But here's where it begins to shift, when you stop chasing love and start becoming the source of it. When you begin to mother yourself not out of compensation, but out of remembrance. That voice within you, the one that says you're enough, the one that whispers slow down, the one that knows your worth even in silence, that voice is not fantasy. It is the inner mother, and she's been waiting for you to turn inward, not for perfection, but for reunion. To reclaim her is to let go of the need for your biological mother to give you what she never could. It's to grieve what was missing without being trapped in the grief. It's to say, I will not abandon myself the way I was abandoned. I will not silence my needs because she had to. I will not fear my softness because it made her vulnerable. This is not rebellion, it is resurrection. You are not rejecting your lineage. You are remembering the original template of wholeness that existed before the wounds. And when this happens, when you begin to live from the inner mother, you move differently. You no longer seek healing as a project. You become a place where healing naturally happens. You don't fix yourself to be lovable. You love yourself into wholeness. You stop seeking closure from those who can't give it, and instead become the closure you needed. Because you've reclaimed the voice inside that says, I see you, I hear you, I will never leave you. Jung didn't promise that this path would be easy, but he knew it was sacred, because when one person liberates the inner mother, they begin to break cycles that go back generations. They stop passing down deprivation and start transmitting presence. And slowly, quietly, the entire lineage begins to shift. So maybe healing was never about going back to fix what was broken. Maybe it was always about going deeper to rediscover what was buried, to reclaim what was silenced, and to finally live the truth your mother never got to. And that's when you realize you don't just heal for yourself, you heal for her too.